Hey there. Tonight we're going to drift back far back to a time of sun-warmed marble courtyards, lyres echoing in the distance, and sandalwood smoke curling from braziers in shaded villas. But this isn't one of those nights where you'll be watching philosophers argue in togas or sipping wine with the aristocrats. No, tonight you're stepping into a quieter story one barely whispered in the stone corridors of ancient Greece. A story where you don't speak unless spoken to, where your job is to be present, not noticed, where comfort is reserved for someone else, and your smile, your schedule, even your sleep, all belong to someone else. If you're still with me, perhaps nestled under a warm blanket, or letting the day finally fall away, you might want to take a moment to subscribe. Only if you'd like to, of course. This is the kind of history we tell gently, the kind that doesn't make headlines but lingers like candlelight. We're going to walk slowly through a day you wouldn't survive. Not because it's violent or loud, but because it's invisible. So close your eyes or just let your gaze go soft. Let's walk barefoot across the cool mosaic tiles of an Athenian villa and see quietly what life was really like for a male concubine in ancient Greece. You awaken to footsteps again. Not your own, not the shuffle of a slave's wooden sandals down the outer corridor, but the softer brush of bare feet gliding over polished floor. You don't dare move too quickly, but you sit up. It's instinct, not choice. The fabric of your thin linen chiton creases where you slept in it, and you smooth it with practiced fingers, already alert, already preparing for the day. There's no such thing as your morning anymore. Mornings, like everything else, belong to someone else. You've learned to listen carefully. The sound of movement in the main atrium means the house is stirring. It might be the patron rising your patron. If he wants breakfast, you must be nearby. If he doesn't, you must still be nearby. This is the rule: you are always available, even when you're invisible. The room you sleep in is tucked behind a passage off the peristyle. It has no locks, of course. Why would it? It isn't meant to be private. The door creaks when opened, but you've oiled the hinges yourself quietly, because that's what you're supposed to do. Anticipate, prevent disturbance, serve before asked. You slide your feet into the coolness of the stone and move toward the low window. Outside, a column of doves scurries along the courtyard edge. The sun hasn't fully risen yet, but light is already softening the darkness. That's your real alarm. Daylight is for his life. Yours starts in the half-light, always one step ahead. It's not a bad room, technically. You've seen worse, especially among the kitchen boys and stable hands. Your room is small, and it has one woven mat, a folded woolen throw, and a shelf for grooming items, combed cloth oil flask. No mirror. Mirrors are for people with time and identity. You have neither. In Athens, the presence of male attendants, especially those like you, was not entirely secret, nor entirely spoken of. There was a word, pur delicatus, borrowed from Latin, but whispered here too. It meant something like delicate boy, and it didn't refer to illness. It referred to beauty, to grace, to usefulness, as a soft addition to the household. In some homes it was a compliment, in others a warning, but always it meant belonging not to yourself, but to someone else. Your duties weren't written down because they weren't formal. Unlike the house slaves who had fixed tasks: fetch water, tend the fire, you were a floating presence. One day you might be asked to stand behind your patron at a gathering, another to deliver a message. Sometimes simply to sit beside him on the couch while he drank and talked about statecraft or war or poetry. You're not expected to speak, though occasionally he'd ask what you thought. You'd respond modestly, never directly. The role you fill is neither praised nor condemned in public. It exists in a shadow space, acknowledged in art, omitted from policy. And yet it's as real as the marble under your feet. There's a tidbit here you might find peculiar, according to some fragments of Athenian gossip poems. Rare verses passed down orally. There were known houses that trained boys like you, not just in music, but in the subtle art of posture. How to tilt your head just enough to seem thoughtful, not disinterested. How to walk softly even on gravel. How to accept attention without seeking it. You were meant to be serene, not seductive, elegant, not assertive, and in the strange duality of your life, you became quite good at it. As you dress quietly, your mind races ahead, not with excitement, but caution. Will he rise early today? Will guests arrive? Will you be called to carry a lute, or to fetch something from the storeroom you're not supposed to enter? Will he be in a mood? Will you have to smile? Or worse, will you have to pretend you didn't hear something cruel? Historians still debate whether relationships like yours in classical Athens were rooted in affection power or social performance. Some point to the pederastic ideals found in Plato's dialogues, supposedly noble mentorships between older men and beautiful youths, as the origin of such roles. Others argue that what began as a structured pedagogical custom became in certain houses a blurry line between intimacy and servitude. But for you, standing in the pre-dawn hush, smoothing your robe and watching the gold edge of the sun creep along the hallway wall, it doesn't matter. You're not part of a philosophical argument. You're just a boy in a borrowed life, hoping today is a quiet one. You hear the sound clear now. Here, a soft throat clearing from the other side of the corridor. Not angry, not urgent, but meant for you. That's your cue. You open the door and step forward, your eyes lowered. You know what's expected. You know what to do. The day has begun, and no, you wouldn't last long in it. The hallway is cool underfoot as you walk toward the atrium, your steps nearly silent. You've trained yourself to move without drawing attention, not because anyone told you to, but because attention rarely ends well. The morning air smells of damp marble and olive oil, and a low murmur from the kitchen confirms what you already anticipated. The house is fully awake now. That means he is too. Your patron. The man whose rhythms dictate your own. He hasn't called for you yet, but you won't wait to be summoned, you will simply appear. You slip into your usual place beside the outer column. Hands folded, chin lowered posture. Relaxed but alert. There is nothing of yourself on display, only what's expected. The atrium is awash in soft morning light, now filtered through linen blinds and climbing vines. Somewhere a slave woman hums a harvest song. The mosaic beneath your feet depicting Theseus wrestling the Minotaur is just another story of someone trapped, someone fighting to survive a maze. And yet here you are in a different kind of maze, one of wealth and silence and beautiful surfaces that hide their shadows well. Your room lies just behind this courtyard, tucked between the kitchen and the servants' quarters. It's larger than most, but still windowless, because your comfort is not a concern, only your availability. The woven curtain you use for privacy was a rare indulgence, granted by a previous steward, long gone now. The rest of your space is tidy functional. No decoration, no personal tokens. Everything inside it is issued or borrowed. You are a well-kept object, not a person with possessions. That's the strangest part, perhaps, the way this life wraps itself in luxury, while denying you the simplest sense of ownership. Even your name is rarely spoken. You're referred to by titles or gestures. That one, or my boy, or sometimes simply him. No one ever says your full name aloud unless they're angry or nostalgic, or both. Historical accounts from Athens rarely dwell on people like you, but archaeological studies of elite homes like those in the wealthy district of Delos have uncovered floor plans that included small inward-facing rooms adjacent to the master suite. These were too comfortable to be storerooms, but too isolated to be family quarters. Many scholars now believe they were reserved for special attendants, close in proximity but far from equality. And perhaps the oddest detail one preserved wall, believed to be from the bedroom of a prominent statesman, bore a faint scratch in the plaster. Just a line, then another, then dozens. as if someone over years had been counting the days. You imagine this as you stand waiting, your own fingers idly tracing the seam of your tunic. You've long stopped imagining that this room or this hallway or even this household was ever yours. In fact, you've started to forget what yours meant. Things are for others. Space is borrowed. Your presence here is not about belonging. It's about orbiting someone else's life so closely that you vanish into its glare. Still, there are small comforts. You've come to appreciate the precision of the morning routines, the way the sun crawls across the same column each day at the same hour, the scent of fresh bread when the cook opens the oven, the brief warmth of a sunbeam that lands on the floor near your feet just before mid-morning. These moments aren't yours either, but at least they aren't someone else's. Sometimes in the stillness you pretend that you're just a guest, that your life beyond these walls is waiting, that you're here temporarily observing. But the longer you live like this, the harder it is to maintain the illusion. The room isn't yours. The robe isn't yours. Even your reflection in the polished brass basin starts to feel like someone else's face. Historians often debate whether attendants like you were considered part of the household or merely furniture that moved. Some argue that their presence in family rituals suggests a level of inclusion. Others counter that being seen does not equal being acknowledged. The question really isn't whether you were visible, it's whether anyone ever looked. You're startled out of your thoughts by the sound of sandals. Not hurried, not loud, but deliberate. You raise your eyes only slightly. It's one of the steward's aides gesturing with a small tilt of the head. You're needed in the side chamber. This is how it always is. No words, just movement. You're not called. You're directed. As you walk toward the chamber, you pass an open door, the study. You glance inside for just a moment. A stack of scrolls rests beside a wine jug. Ink still wet on the edge of a papyrus sheet. The words were written by your patron only moments ago, and yet you are not allowed to know what they say. You who stand close enough to pour his wine cannot be trusted with his thoughts. And perhaps that is what defines your space. Most clearly, you are physically close but emotionally distant. You are near his breath, his voice, his gaze, but far from his confidence. The room you enter is still dim. Lamps flicker against the wall, their oil wicks casting soft halos. The steward nods, then leaves. You begin preparing the space as you were taught. You smooth the couch cushion, arrange the drinking bowl, adjust the tray of fruit, even though no one ever eats the figs. You do it because he might notice if you don't. Or worse, he might not notice, but someone else will. There's a curious fact about homes like this in Athens. The more powerful the family, the more silent its inner spaces. Outer courtyards were loud, full of clamor and negotiation, but the private chambers, the ones where people like you existed, were designed for quiet. It was intentional. Control was easier in silence. And so you move quietly, breathing evenly, existing within the edges of someone else's life. You remember once long ago asking a question, just one, about a word you'd heard in the symposium hall. You were corrected gently. You were not here to know. You were here to be present, poised and pleasant. Since then, you've learned what questions are safe. Would you like more wine? Shall I fetch the scroll? Will there be guests tonight? All others are best left unasked. As the oil lamp flickers beside you, your hands rest lightly in your lap. You don't fidget. You don't sigh. You simply wait. That's your job. You exist in the margins. You're not scenery, not quite, but you're not the story either. And when the door finally opens and he enters, you rise without a sound as always. The morning is passing, and your name once again is not spoken. The air in the villa shifts subtly, the kind of change you learn to sense not through noise or orders, but through an instinct sharpened by repetition and necessity. Somewhere in the house, the cadence of footsteps grows firmer, more deliberate. You know what that means. Something is expected of you, but as always, no one will say what that is. You must intuit it translates silence into service. This is how you survive here, not by asking, but by anticipating. You leave your post near the atrium, the marble underfoot slightly warmer now, as the morning light strengthens through the open ceiling. The birdsong outside continues its gentle refrain, a background rhythm to your careful movements. You're already adjusting your posture as you reach the private chamber, where your patron prefers to spend his mornings, neither too stiff nor too relaxed, always available, always poised, but never imposing. Inside the room smells faintly of parchment, aged olive oil, and the trace of incense burned hours ago. The cushion beside the reading couch is slightly askew. A corner of a scroll pokes from under a writing board, and a cup of diluted wine sits untouched its surface, catching a small patch of golden light. These are small details, but they matter. Each one must be corrected, not because anyone has told you to, but because not correcting them would be noticed. Perhaps not today, perhaps not this hour, but eventually. And in this life, even one moment of misstep can echo far longer than you might think. You straighten the cushion, realign the scroll, and lift the cup just slightly to assess whether it needs refilling. The wine is still cool, the condensation on the bronze faint but present. That means he hasn't touched it since it was brought. Best to leave it then. Replacing something he hasn't asked for can signal that you presume too much. It is a delicate balance, always has been. One that no one teaches, not formally anyway. You learn it over time through observation and the quiet penalties of getting it wrong. The tilt of a head, the brief tightening at the corners of a mouth, a pause too long when your presence is registered. These are your guideposts. There are no instructions, only outcomes. From the hallway beyond, you hear muted voices, low and controlled. The steward speaking to one of the household aides, perhaps. The words are indistinct, but the tone carries. It's the kind of tone that means preparations are underway, likely for a guest visit or an informal gathering. Your day, already shaped by routines of readiness, now shifts into another gear. You return to your room, small and clean and impersonal, to prepare. In houses like this, especially among the wealthy elite of Athens, the presence of attendants was essential to the performance of status. Wealth wasn't only measured in land or silver, but in how seamlessly your household could operate, how smooth the transitions, how effortless the appearances. Men like your patron cultivated this polish, not just through architecture and art, but through people like you, individuals trained to make luxury appear effortless. You are not the painting on the wall, nor the lyre on the shelf. You are the silence that fills the space between them, the living stillness that allows the room to breathe without drawing breath. You wash your hands with a linen cloth, scented lightly with citrus peel. You smooth the fabric of your robe, adjust the belt to rest, just so across your waist, then tie your hair into the soft knot that signals you are ready for public view. Not a family member, not a guest, but still someone to be presented. It is a role that demands precision. The wrong fold in your tunic, the wrong angle of your stance, even the wrong timing as you enter a room, all of it speaks, even if you do not. There's a small ritual in this one you've made for yourself. Before stepping back out, you take a single breath, hold it, then release it slowly. It helps. Not much, but enough. When you re-enter the hall, you're greeted by the gentle clatter of preparation vessels, being rinsed sandals shuffling across stone, the occasional short bark from the steward directing others. You move without being told, offering assistance where needed, but never inserting yourself too visibly. The steward nods once as you pass by with a tray, an acknowledgement not of approval, but of expectation met. Today, a guest is arriving. You know this because a second set of cushions has been laid out in the secondary hall. A carafe of fresh pomegranate wine has been brought from storage, and the good lamp trimmed with gilt and shaped like a dancing satyr has been placed by the seating mat. These signs are as clear to you as written orders. You're not told who the guest is. It doesn't matter. You won't be expected to speak. You'll be there to serve, to move to observe, without appearing to observe. And above all, you will be pleasant, not enthusiastic, not withdrawn, just neutral, capable, agreeable. A living fixture in the ritual of welcome. In the wider world, your presence might draw questions. But here within these walls, it is understood. Not discussed, not labeled, just understood. In some homes, boys like you were considered part of the decorum of status. Trained to walk a certain way, to tilt your head when acknowledged, to offer exactly the right amount of presence, and then recede. There are surviving vase paintings from the late 5th century BCE that depict banqueting scenes, where a youth never named is seen serving wine or playing a flute, always off-center, always peripheral. No scroll records his name. No speech praises his service. And yet without him the image would feel incomplete. There's something strangely comforting in knowing that your role, while silent, is still necessary, that you are a thread in the tapestry, even if no one traces your pattern. The guest arrives in the late morning. You hear the outer gate open, the murmured greeting between steward and visitor, the soft sound of sandaled feet across the marble. You're already in place, tray balanced in your hands, eyes lowered but attentive. The two men enter your patron and the visitor speaking in low tones. You do not look directly at either, but you sense the glance cast your way, the kind of look that weighs rather than greets. You've felt that look many times. It's not cruel exactly, just evaluative, like someone inspecting a sculpture for cracks. As the two men sit, you move forward smoothly to pour the wine. You fill their cups to the appropriate level, never too much, never more than your patron's cup. The guest reaches for a fig and your hand moves instinctively to adjust the dish so he needn't stretch. The movement is fluid, unobtrusive, just as it should be. For the next while you hover. Not intrusively, not visibly, but there, ready to act. Ready to step forward if a cup is emptied or a plate disturbed. You don't listen to their conversation, it's not meant for you. But you can't help absorbing bits and pieces. Names, cities, a dispute over grain, imports a veiled complaint about a rival's oratory in the assembly. The usual. And then, as often happens, the conversation shifts. You feel it before you hear it, a softening of tone, a narrowing of focus, a gesture in your direction. You're not addressed directly, but you are referenced, as a comparison perhaps, as an example, as a curiosity. You remain still, expression unchanged, posture balanced. This too is part of your role, to be observed without reacting, to be noticed without responding. You become the vase in the room, once more silent, smooth, reflective, but never assertive. Later, when the guest has gone and your patron has retreated into his study, you begin the quiet task of restoring the room. You return the unused fruit to the kitchen, extinguish the lamp, fold the linens. You wipe the condensation from the carafe and replace it on the shelf. Each motion is familiar, unthinking, not because it lacks meaning, but because it has become part of you. There is a tidbit from a surviving household inventory in Piraeus that lists alongside quantities of oil and wine the name of one Philon, noted simply as boy attendant. No role, no rank, no lineage, just that a boy, a presence, a name without context. You wonder how many others were like him, counted but not recorded. Back in your room, you sit for a moment on the edge of the mat. The silence here feels different, not heavy, not tense, just empty, like a glass recently drained. You stretch your legs out in front of you, careful not to wrinkle the robe. There's still more day to come, more duties, another meal to assist with perhaps, a scroll to retrieve, a fire to tend. You'll find out when it's time. But for now you sit, and for a moment no one needs you. For a moment you exist without instruction, and even that moment isn't yours. No, you wouldn't last long in this life. not because it is painful in the ways you might expect, but because it is so thoroughly quiet, so invisibly rigid, so relentlessly absent of choice. You breathe in deeply. The air smells faintly of wine and ash. You breathe out. The moment passes, and you rise. There's a certain posture you must learn, not the physical one, though that's important too. No, this one lives deeper. It's the posture of presence without weight. The ability to exist in a room as though you don't take up space, to breathe in rhythm with someone else's expectations. And as the day moves forward, that posture becomes your second skin. You aren't simply trained to smile. You are trained to mean nothing by it. The sun has risen higher, casting warm stripes across the villa's polished floors. Soon a private gathering will unfold. Not a formal symposium. Those come later when the shadows stretch longer and the wine flows more freely, but something lighter. An informal meeting of minds, or egos. A few learned men, perhaps a traveling rhetorician, a merchant looking to flatter your patron with stories and offerings from abroad. Whatever the case, you're already being prepared to stand in the background, to move only when summoned, and to become essentially atmosphere. You are to stand beside the wine table with the crater and oinocho polished and arranged just so. You are to offer cups without spilling, without hesitating, and without forgetting who prefers his wine diluted with a 1:3 ratio, rather than 1:2. You are not to speak unless spoken to, but even then you're not really expected to say anything meaningful. A nod, a word of agreement, a quick line of memorized verse if asked. That's all. This is not a job. It's not a duty in the formal sense. It's more like an identity, something crafted over years of subtle correction, and even subtler reward. You're not here to provide insight, to engage, or to influence. You are here to offer smoothness, not just in the texture of the wine, but in the flow of the moment. You must make the experience more elegant, without drawing attention to the fact that you're doing anything at all. The gathering takes place in the andron, the men's quarter, adorned with mosaic flooring and low couches arranged in a circle. You've helped arrange it before. You know the slight angle each couch should tilt, how many cushions each guest prefers, how to place the oil lamps to cast flattering light, but avoid heat. It is a geometry of hospitality, and your body is part of the equation. When the men begin to arrive, you're already in position. Tunic, crisp belt cinched at just the right point, hair tied and combed neatly. You're holding a lyre not because anyone has asked you to play, but because someone might. And if they do, you must be ready. One of the men pauses near you, eyeing the instrument with an amused expression. You recognize the look, half test, half indulgence. You begin to play not a song you love, but one you've been told fits this hour of the day. Something with lilting chords and a gentle cadence. Something light forgettable. Something like you. The conversation swirls around you in waves. Politics, philosophy, a newly imported perfume from Syracuse that supposedly carries the scent of crushed fig leaves. Someone mentions a poet who's been gaining favor in the assembly for his odes to civic virtue. Another guest mocks the idea of poetry with purpose. There is laughter, then debate, and then more wine. You refill cups automatically. You notice who speaks most, who listens least, who gestures toward you without looking. Your eyes never linger. You memorize faces, voices, preferences. Not because you want to, but because that's how you survive in a world where being forgettable is oddly the key to being kept. Occasionally your patron glances toward you, a flicker of the eyes, a slight motion of the hand. You respond accordingly, more wine for the merchant, a cushion adjusted for the rhetor, a quote recited in perfect cadence when the discussion veers towards Sophocles. You become a kind of punctuation, slipping into the silences, softening the jagged edges of male egos, clashing in polite robes. You are not flattered. You are not included. But you are useful. In ancient Greece, especially in upper-class circles, The presence of such attendants was a mark of refinement. Boys trained in music, verse etiquette, decorative minds, and decorative bodies. Their value was aesthetic, their purpose performative. And yet they were not simply objects. They had to be alert, intelligent, adaptable. A beautiful statue doesn't refill wine. You do. There's a vase in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens that shows a similar scene, 5 men reclining, one young boy in the background, pouring wine with his head bowed. No name, no distinguishing marks, just a small figure frozen in glaze. A visual whisper. You finish playing and return the lyre to its resting place. Someone comments on your touch, a remark, tossed out like a bone to a well-trained dog. You nod, smile gently. You've been taught to take compliments as instructions, not as gifts. What he likely meant was you may be called to play again. So you keep your fingers warm and your mind ready. The sun shifts. The oil lamps burn lower. The room smells of figs, wine sweat, and sandalwood. You clear plates, retrieve more water, and sweep away the discarded olive pits that somehow always end up scattered across the floor, like tiny forgotten insults. It's during a pause in the gathering when the guests are distracted by a story about a sea captain's misfortune in Rhodes that you find yourself standing too still, a little too present. You realize it just in time and pivot, gliding quietly to the back of the room where you can still see everyone, but draw no focus. That's the trick. Always be present, but never central. There's an emotional toll to all of this, though it doesn't announce itself loudly. It wears you down, not in grand blows, but in soft daily abrasions. The way a comment lands on your back like a tap that keeps dripping long after the moment ends. The way someone asks for your presence as if they're ordering fruit. The way a compliment can carry more weight than silence because it reminds you that you're being watched. Historians still argue whether boys in your position were officially part of household records, or if they existed entirely outside of them. Some evidence suggests they were adopted into the family structure, at least ceremonially. Others believe they remained in a gray zone, neither kin nor servant nor slave, floating between categories like ghosts with chores. You've seen how the household treats others who fail to meet expectations. The kitchen boy who broke a dish and was sent away. The scribe who copied a passage incorrectly and now works outside the villa walls in the sun. You've learned from their mistakes. You keep your back straight, your voice soft, your smile practiced. By the time the guests leave, your limbs are buzzing, not from exertion, but from restraint. You've stood, smiled, played, poured, and adjusted your presence to suit half a dozen moods. And now, finally, you are invisible again. You collect the empty vessels now warm with the residue of shared hours. You stack the plates and fold the linens. The lamps are extinguished one by one until the room returns to quiet shadow. The conversation has ended, but its echoes linger in your joints. There's a strange freedom in this moment when no one is watching. You are allowed to move slightly faster, to breathe slightly deeper. You hum to yourself very softly a song you weren't asked to play, one that belongs to you alone. Back in your room, you undress with careful hands, fold the tunic you wore, and place it near the basin. Your muscles ache not from movement, but from control. You stretch slowly, methodically, like a performer easing out of character. In the corner, your own lyre rests smaller than the one used for public performance. You don't play it often, but tonight you pluck a few strings. The notes sound raw, quiet, slightly uneven. You let them hang in the air just long enough to hear them fade. Somewhere in the house, a door closes. The sound reminds you that your time even now is not your own. Sleep will come, but only as a pause, not a sanctuary. Still, you allow yourself a final moment of stillness. You lie on your mat, eyes open, watching the flicker of a candle near the threshold. The flame dances untamed by expectation. You think of the guests, of their voices, their laughter, the way they spoke over one another, and how none of them knew your name. You think of the vase in the museum, The boy pouring wine. You think of how even in art you are placed at the edge, and you wonder not with anger, not even with sadness, but simply wonder how many boys have stood where you now lie, asking the same quiet question. If you were gone tomorrow, would anyone notice the silence? The candle flickers once more, and then you sleep. There's a curious silence that settles over the villa after each event. Not the kind of quiet that brings rest, but the kind that sharpens your awareness of your place within these walls. You return to your chamber, not because it's yours, but because that is where you're supposed to go. The room accepts you without warmth. The cot is clean, the jug is full, and the shutters are angled just right to keep the air moving. But nothing here has your name on it, because names are for people who own, who inherit, who matter. And you, of course, are none of those things. You've long since noticed that you don't quite belong to any category. You're not a slave because you weren't bought at market. You eat with silverware and you're taught poetry and philosophy. You dress in woven linen, not in rags. You've even shared moments brief choreographed in silent standing, next to citizens who hold office and command legions. And yet you are also not free. You may not leave. You have no coin of your own. You may not vote, speak in the assembly, or even walk the streets unattended. You have the education of a freeman and the liberty of a prisoner. There are scrolls kept in the house archive under lock that list the staff of this estate, the cooks, the scribes, the groundsmen. You've seen them in passing. The names are their neatly copied salaries listed in drachma rolls assigned by function. Your name is not there. You've never seen your name in ink, not in this house nor anywhere else. Historians have wrestled with this legal limbo for years. In Athens and other parts of the classical world, boys in your position occupied a strange in-between state. Some were fostered by noble households but never adopted. Others were taken in as tribute, especially if they were from allied regions. They were trained in speech dance and civility, but they were given no path to independence. They had no legal advocates. If one was dismissed, there was no hearing. If one disappeared, there was no search. And perhaps most unsettling of all, there was no law to prevent mistreatment. Not because cruelty was allowed, but because there were no laws written for you in the first place. You recall a boy from another estate, a musician you once encountered at a festival. He played the aulos with delicate precision and was the pride of his master's household. But then came a scandal rumors that he had embarrassed his patron during a performance. He vanished by the next moon. No charges were filed, no witnesses summoned. It was as though he had been erased, not punished. He'd never really existed in the eyes of the city. In your quieter moments, you sometimes wonder what would happen if you fell ill. Would a physician come? Would anyone tell your family if you still have one? Would they remember your face? Of course you do not speak of such thoughts. To dwell on them is to invite instability. And so you keep moving. You keep showing up at dawn hair comb sandals tied ready to be of use. Today is a day without ceremony, which often makes it the most dangerous kind. Without structure, expectations become even less clear. You assist in the garden clipping rosemary and lavender to place in ceramic bowls for scenting the halls. You help the steward prepare the oil lamps. You rehang the summer curtains, threading them through the ceiling hooks with practiced ease. You are always busy but never recognized. At midday you're told to accompany your patron to the city center. Not beside him, of course, never beside. You walk 4 steps behind head, slightly bowed eyes scanning the street for obstructions or anything that might displease him. In the agora, the marketplace bustles with color and sound fruit vendors, calling out prices, politicians gesturing passionately, mothers negotiating for linen children darting through the crowds. You are invisible here too. No one greets you even when you hold the parcels. No one expects you to answer if addressed. When your patron stops to speak with a scholar about recent theater laws, you remain just behind his shoulder, motionless, watching the dust settle on your sandals. There are those who assume boys like you are fortunate. After all, you live in a fine house, eat well, and learn to read. But this privilege is conditional. You are always on trial, though no verdict is ever spoken aloud. Your value is measured not in affection or fairness, but in usefulness. When you are no longer useful, you are no longer present. A tidbit that rarely appears in textbooks. In the court of a wealthy Athenian politician, a boy attendant once left a sandal strap untied before a public event. The patron was embarrassed when he stumbled upon entry. The boy was reassigned, not punished, not dismissed, just quietly moved to a countryside villa. The implication was clear. His failure made him unfit for the visible roles. He had become a liability. You think of that story often when adjusting your own straps. That evening, when you return to the estate, no one greets you at the door. You re-enter silently, place your patron's cloak on the stand, and step back into your designated shadows. You pass the library. Technically, you're allowed to read the scrolls there, but only under supervision, and never with candles. Fire is for citizens. Light is something you must borrow. In the dining hall, preparations are underway for a late meal. You assist without instruction, as always, placing bowls in the right configuration, laying sprigs of mint on the dishes, folding linen napkins into half crescents. You could do it all in your sleep. Perhaps you already are. As the household gathers to eat, you're positioned against the far wall, standing beside the basin. You do not eat here. Your food will be brought to your chamber later, once the plates are cleared. You watch the meal unfold with the stillness of a painting. There is no malice in the air tonight, no raised voices or biting words, just quiet conversation, the sound of cutlery, the occasional laugh. These are the better evenings when you can be present without tension. But still you are not safe, not truly, because your safety depends not on rules, but on whims, on whether someone remembers your usefulness, on whether your silence is appreciated rather than resented, on whether you vanish when you're supposed to and appear when it's convenient. You end the day as you began it alone, unnamed and half invisible. You light a small oil lamp in your room just for a moment to see the outline of your own face in the polished bronze plate you use as a mirror. The flame flickers, the outline wavers, and in that soft shimmer you ask yourself, not with despair but with a calm, persistent ache, what name would history give to someone like you? It does not answer. The next morning does not begin so much as continue, because in truth your sleep is rarely complete. You rise before the birds stir, before even the courtyard cat wanders out to claim its favorite patch of sun. The house is still wrapped in silence, a kind of hush that holds its breath in anticipation. You know the pattern by now. Today your body is not just to be present, it is to be seen, not as yourself, but as something finely shaped, delicately prepared and impossibly polished. You've been summoned for grooming. Not by a voice, but by a look passed in the hallway the night before, the way your patron steward lingered a moment longer than usual. You've come to recognize these cues almost like a language one, where the verbs are gestures and the nouns are expectations. You do not ask what it's for. You do not ask if you will be presented today, or simply used to decorate the edges of a meeting. Your task is not to question. It is to become beautiful. So you bathe slowly, carefully. You scrape oil over your limbs with a strigil, removing every trace of fatigue, of sweat of humanity. You comb your hair until it shines, and then wait to see whether it will be left natural or braided, depending on the whim of the house. Your tunic today is finer than usual, thinner, slightly translucent at the edges, where the linen has been woven to flutter with movement. There are ankle rings and a delicate sash at your waist, not for support but for symmetry. You are in every sense being curated. The reflection you see in the basin is no longer entirely yours. It is a version of you constructed to please, to project refinement, to hint at charm without ever becoming seductive. You are to be beautiful, but only within the safe confines of someone else's control. Too much allure would be dangerous, too little disappointing. The line you must walk is razor-thin and entirely unwritten. In ancient Greek society, aesthetics were not a luxury, they were a moral philosophy. Beauty was associated with virtue, with harmony, even with divine favor. For young men like you, especially those in the inner circles of elite households, beauty was not a gift. It was a job. Your posture had to be graceful. Your gestures refined your presence, pleasing to the eye but not distracting from the room. You were there to elevate the scene without becoming its focus. And so after the grooming comes the performance. Not on a stage, not with a script, but with your body in space. You practice walking again, even though you've done it 1,000 times. Head neither too high nor too low, steps measured but soft. You rememorize a few lines of verse just in case someone asks for a recitation. You check your nails, the folds of your tunic, the faint line where the sash crosses your ribs. Today's gathering is small but significant. A visiting orator from Thebes has been invited to dine privately with your patron. This is not a symposium for debate, nor a banquet for celebration. It is a subtle negotiation of favors. And you, of course, are part of the theater, not the star, just the lighting. As the orator arrives, you're already in position. You open the door, bowing just enough to appear reverent, not servile. You lead him into the hall without speaking. Your presence is meant to convey grace, not authority. The two men begin their meal discussing matters far above your station. Property disputes in Boeotia, the politics of grain, imports the philosophy of moderation. You stand nearby offering wine when required, adjusting a lamp that flickers, and remaining perfectly still when not needed. You feel the orator's eyes on you occasionally, not with desire necessarily, but with curiosity, as though trying to place you in the social hierarchy and failing. That's because you don't quite fit. You're not the servant. You're not the son. You're something in between, an ornament with breath. Your hands are steady as you pour the wine, but your mind drifts. You remember the tidbit passed to you once by an older attendant who'd since been dismissed. He said that in certain houses, boys like you were taught to walk with slightly wet feet, so their footprints would mark the polished floors, reminding guests of their presence without needing to speak. It was both art and warning. You never knew whether it was true, but ever since then you've paid attention to the echo of your own steps. The meal concludes without event. There are no compliments, no insults, no incidents. You are returned to invisibility, but only just. Your patron gives you a brief glance, perhaps of approval, perhaps not, and you are free to leave the hall. But you don't return to your room yet. You're escorted instead to a second chamber, where the house matron inspects your grooming again. She smooths a fold of your sash, adjusts a lock of hair, and steps back to study you with a critical eye. There is no cruelty in her touch, but no affection either. You are a canvas she is responsible for maintaining. She says nothing. You nod slightly and retreat. The rest of the day is quiet. You are not called again, which can be either a relief or a warning. You move through the halls without footsteps, fold linens, refill oil flasks, brush the dust from the mosaic tiles. These small tasks ground you. They do not require performance, only precision. And yet, even in these mundane moments, you are aware of being watched. A household like this does not run on kindness. It runs on scrutiny. Later that evening, you sit briefly in the outer courtyard near the edge of the herb garden. The scent of thyme and lemon leaf is calming. You are alone, not just physically, but conceptually. There is no role to perform out here, no eyes to please. For a few breaths, you exist as yourself. Not a smile, not a shadow, not a silhouette dressed in silk. You think of those like you across the city, other boys in other households also groomed, also trained, also unseen. You wonder whether they feel the same strange ache, the loneliness of being curated. Historians still debate whether boys in your position were considered members of the household, or merely assets useful, beautiful, and replaceable. Some records mention them obliquely, the boy who plays the flute, the one who recites Euripides. Rarely are names preserved, and almost never are emotions described. But tonight, beneath the indigo sky, you allow yourself one quiet emotion. Not bitterness, not sorrow. Just a longing to be seen not as beautiful, not as useful, but simply as real. Morning again. The same silence, the same pale light slipping through lattice windows, the same soft padding of bare feet across tile. But today the air feels slightly different, not in temperature, but in tension. There's an outing planned, and whenever you are taken into public view, your role becomes even more precise. You will not walk ahead nor beside, nor stray too far behind. You will be exactly where you're expected to be, just far enough to disappear into the corner of a nobleman's presence, but near enough that your hand can be summoned with a flick. The cloak you're given is slightly heavier than usual, dyed a dignified brown with a pale border, muted but fine. You wear no insignia, of course. That is not for someone like you. As the household prepares, no one explains the day's destination. But when your patron appears in ceremonial garb, you understand this is not merely a stroll. It will be a procession. Athens loves its processions. From the Panathenaic festival to minor local dedications, public ceremony was how the city reminded itself who held honor, who held power, and who held neither. And as a male attendant, your job is to exist precisely within that invisible third space. The chariot is modest, drawn by 2 white horses, burnished bronze reins gleaming in the early sun. You do not ride, you walk, 4 paces behind as always. One hand folded within the other, eyes alert but unfocused. You are not meant to gaze at anyone. You are not meant to distract. Your presence should register only when your absence would cause delay. The streets swell with sound as the procession advances. There is music from aulos players, rhythmic and sharp. Children scatter petals. Priests wave censers. Women lean from balconies observing. You sense the weight of all these eyes, yet none are truly on you. You are part of the spectacle, but not part of the meaning. Your steps are carefully measured, the soles of your sandals tracing patterns in the dust. This is not your city, though you know its paths better than many who vote in its assemblies. You've seen the agora in the morning, the gymnasium at dusk, the long shadows of temple columns stretching toward the Acropolis, but always from behind someone else's shoulder, always one step removed. In fact, there's a small mosaic near the Dipylon Gate that shows a similar scene, noblemen scholars, and behind them barely visible the outline of a youth holding a scroll. A detail, a figure so subtly placed, it's often missed unless you're looking for it. You saw it once while waiting for your patron to finish a meeting with the city's archon. You stared at that mosaic for so long that you memorized its pattern. You remember thinking that boy could be anyone. He could be you. And yet you are never depicted. Not in pottery, not in poetry, not in the inscriptions that line the city's stoas. The only proof you were ever here is the way your shadow curves slightly differently when you walk past marble. The day's ceremony is brief but ornate. Offerings to the goddess Hestia, speeches, applause. The usual quiet maneuvering of alliances dressed up as religious devotion. You hand your patron a clean cloth to wipe his brow. You refill his cup. When the speech ends, you collect the scroll without being asked. All of it is precise, expected. All of it is invisible. Historians still argue whether boys like you were educated for the sake of refinement, or simply to better serve their masters in social spaces. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. You are taught just enough to be impressive, but not independent. Cultured, but never free. As you walk back toward the estate, your legs ache not from exertion, but from restraint. Hours of careful pacing wear you down in a different way than labor. It's the fatigue of containment, of holding yourself within an unspoken frame. Back at the villa, the procession disperses. The guests go inside. The horses are led away. You remain outside a moment longer than usual, just beneath the olive tree near the entrance. Its leaves shimmer in the late light. You allow yourself one deep breath before returning to shadow. There's a tidbit told in private among attendants like you of a boy in a senator's house who once miscalculated the number of paces behind his patron during a temple entry. He stepped too close, brushing the man's cloak. The priest noticed. The boy was never seen at ceremonies again. It wasn't a scandal, merely an error, but the punishment was total invisibility. You've never forgotten that story. It's why you sometimes count your steps even now. That evening during supper, your feet throb faintly beneath your robes. You serve as usual, replenishing platters, adjusting seating mats. A guest compliments the ambiance, and your patron accepts it as his own achievement. You are not mentioned, but you feel no anger. That would be misplaced. This has always been the design. The stars appear one by one as you finish your duties. You retire to your chamber, a word that still feels misplaced. You undress in silence, fold the day's tunic precisely, and sit on the edge of your cot. From your window, you can just see the villa's outer wall and the road leading away toward the city. You've never walked that road alone. You wonder not for the first time whether you ever will, because you are not a citizen, not a freeman, and not even quite a servant. You are the line that connects the figure to the background in every painting, the motion behind the stillness. And if you were to vanish tomorrow, the story would continue without you, except for a slight tremor in the pattern, a detail missing from the procession, a pause in the recitation where your hands once steadied the wine. But you would notice, and tonight as the city hums with its own dreams and dramas, you sit in stillness one step behind everything, and wonder what it would feel like to stand alone, just once. Night comes without announcement. The sky turns from its usual smoky blue to a denser, quieter gray, and still you are not dismissed. The soft glow of oil lamps begins to fill the corridors, casting warm shadows across the polished floors and the curved doorways. You walk the length of the outer peristyle with silent steps, not because you're ordered to, but because silence has long since become your reflex. Tonight is not special. There is no grand symposium, no political dinner, no poetry reading that requires your posture to hold a room. And yet you remain alert. In this life, stillness is not rest. It is readiness. You've gone to bed before only to be called again, sometimes for trivial tasks, to retrieve a forgotten goblet, to recite a few lines of Homer, because the guest couldn't sleep, or simply to appear for no other reason than to remind someone they held power over you. Your chamber waits for you like it always does, small, tidy, modest in the way that's neither comforting nor cruel. There's a blanket folded neatly in the corner, a basin half filled with cool water, and the faint scent of lavender that clings to the linens, a luxury gifted not to you, but to the reputation of the household. Even your sleep must not offend. You sit on the edge of your cot still dressed. You've learned not to undress until you're sure no one else will need you. Your body does not belong to the night. It belongs to the call should it come. And so you wait, sometimes only for minutes, sometimes until the oil lamp burns low. On rare occasions, all the way until dawn untouched, but never unready. It's in these moments that your thoughts drift again, not to escape, but to understanding. You think of how your role has always been to hover in the borderlands, not noble, not servant, not enslaved, not free. You are the crease between definitions, the comma, in the sentence of someone else's life. And the longer you stay in this role, the more the world accepts that crease as simply part of the page. Historians still debate the legal status of attendants like you in classical Greece. Were you technically household members, contracted companions, or something more fluid? The records are vague. Some accounts treat you like apprentices, others like courtiers. Most simply do not name you at all. But the evidence lingers in the side figures on vases, the background roles in dramas, the anonymous lines in household inventories that list garments for the boy, or musical instruction for one youth. You are everywhere and nowhere. There's a tidbit told among scholars, though it doesn't make it into textbooks. A fragment of an old wall painting in the ruins of a house near Delphi shows a banquet scene. 6 men reclining one youth, standing pouring wine from a crater. What made the fragment strange was that the artist had begun to paint the youth's face, and then for reasons unknown scraped it away. The rest of the painting remains vibrant. Only his image is absent, erased mid-gesture, as though the artist suddenly remembered the boy was not meant to be remembered. You think of that story now as your eyelids grow heavy. The call has not come. The hallways remain still. Even the house cat has tucked itself beneath a bench tail, wrapped in a soft curl. The silence becomes something close to peace. Not because it soothes you, but because for a few short hours it does not demand anything from you. You lie down without ceremony. You do not close the door. You cannot. Your eyes adjust to the darkness slowly. The ceiling above you is blank, uncarved, undecorated. Just smooth plaster aging gently with time. You watch it like one might watch the sky quietly without asking it for anything. You wonder not with bitterness but with curiosity whether the life you live now is one that will fade completely from memory when you're gone, or if perhaps somewhere far in the future someone might wonder about you. Not the name you were never given, not the titles you never held, just the experience, the shape of your silence, the rhythm of your daily obedience, the quiet ache of a life lived entirely behind. And with that your breath evens, your body softens, not into sleep but into stillness, not quite rest, but the closest thing to it. You do not dream of escape, only of being real. And tomorrow when the footsteps come again, you will rise. Not for yourself, but because you always do. But perhaps somewhere someone else like you once stood beneath a different sky in a different empire with the same questions. So now, as your Greek day fades gently into memory, let us quietly open the curtain to the other lives, other dynasties, other shadows who bore the same silence. You've barely let the idea of sleep settle when your mind slips away. Not into dreams, but into echoes across dynasties, across stone and silk into another world altogether. A world where the days begin not with sunlight, but the sound of bronze bells, where incense smokes curl through carved screens, and where you still exist, but under a different sky with a different name. You are no longer the nameless shadow pacing in an Athenian villa. You are now part of Han Dynasty China, 2,000 years ago behind the red walls of the palace, where a life of silence was no less orchestrated, no less invisible. There you awaken in a chamber even smaller than your cot-lined room in Greece. The windows are slivers shaped more for ritual than for light. The floor is lacquered, swept each morning before the cock crows. You share the space with no one, and yet it is never truly yours. Your presence is assigned. Your voice is withheld. You are one of the Xiaojian young male attendants selected for their looks, composure, and above all obedience. The term Xiaojian literally means small officials, though you are neither small in stature nor official in power. You are not eunuchs in the technical sense, at least not all of you, but your masculinity has been softened into grace, folded into ritual and rinsed of its sharpness. Your job is not to lead armies or pass edicts. It is to understand when to appear and when to vanish, to know the rhythm of the imperial household so precisely that your presence feels more like timing than action. From the moment you open your eyes, you feel it, the heaviness of protocol. The cold of winter has curled under the edge of your floor mat, and the ink-stained air clings to the linen draped around your shoulders. A faint chime marks the second hour after midnight. That's your cue. You wash in silence, dress in practiced order, and rehearse your breath before even opening the sliding lattice door. The Empress is stirring. Her inner court, separate from the Emperor's realm, is a labyrinth of chambers, each housing noble women, secondary consorts, ritualists, and advisors. And each of them requires tending garments, aired and folded powders, mixed from crushed pearls and saffron ceremonial tokens, polished and aligned according to the Book of Rites. You are assigned not just to serve, but to know. Know where the Empress keeps her fan for winter ceremonies. Know how many steps she takes before fatigue reaches her. Know how often she gazes at her late husband's portrait, and how long she lingers. You carry this knowledge not with pride, but with stillness. There is no praise, no reward, only the relief of not being dismissed. In the records left behind by Han scribes, your name does not appear, but the duties you fulfill those live on hidden, between the brushstrokes of inventory scrolls and ceremonial rosters. One list from 29 BCE notes, 38 pairs of slippers distributed to the Empress's court, among them 4 pairs for those who rise before the sun. That last line. That's for you. You serve meals you don't taste, arrange flowers, whose scents are not for your pleasure, and pour tea, whose warmth is meant to carry someone else's grief. Your hands never tremble, your eyes never wander. Because even a glance upward, outward, away can be seen as a breach of station. Not necessarily punished, but quietly recorded, and those records live longer than memory. The Empress passes you without acknowledging your presence. Her robe sways like a tide embroidered dragon's, rippling with each step. You adjust the candlelight in her chamber, then disappear behind the folding screen until summoned. You are not part of the ceremony. You are the silence that makes it possible. Historians still debate your exact legal role in the Han court. You were not considered slaves, yet you had no autonomy. You received stipends, wore robes of a certain color, even learned classical texts, yet could not own property or marry. Some scholars suggest the Xiaojian may have functioned as moral companions. Others see you as administrative tools, beautiful and disposable. But the records agree on one point: you were necessary. The court could not function without you. There's a lesser-known account in the Yongle-Dadian, a 15th century encyclopedia referencing earlier Han customs. It describes a group of male attendants, trained to walk through corridors filled with finely sifted sand mixed with powdered clove. The soft sand hushed their steps while the cloves ensured that every movement left a trace of perfume behind. Even your silence had to be scented. You imagine that corridor now. Each footfall disappears into softness. The lamps flicker gently, casting long shadows across the silk-covered walls. You carry a bronze basin polished by your own hand, filled with water, warmed to precisely the right temperature for the Empress's ceremonial cleansing. Not too hot, not too cold, just warm enough to draw away the night. There is no gratitude for your precision, but there is no reprimand either, and in a world governed by hierarchy, that absence of correction feels almost like praise. Evening falls and the palace hums with restrained rhythm. The Empress attends to a tea ritual with her closest attendants. You are stationed behind the last curtain, watching the level of her cup, without lifting your gaze. When she gestures once without words, you refill the tea with a steadiness that borders on artistry. A jade dropper, not a teapot. A silk cloth to catch the steam. A bow with a lowered hand, then retreat. No footsteps, no glance, only presence. When the ritual ends, you are the last to leave. The hallway is empty now, the candles low. You pause in the stillness, not because you're allowed to, but because it is safe to do so. And in that pause you begin to wonder, is your role unique to this palace, this dynasty? Or are you part of something older, deeper? A thread woven through the tapestries of many empires, binding together those who served unseen. The answer isn't written in any scroll, but it flickers in the oil lamp, whispers in the footfall of your steps, and settles like dust on your folded robes. You pass by a painting in the inner corridor, a scroll showing a crane, a lotus pond, and in the corner, two small figures, one holding a fan, the other adjusting a lantern. The noblewoman is central, golden robes shining. But the boys barely sketched, their faces left blank. And yet without them, the scene has no life. You exhale. Centuries from now, your name may not be remembered, but your shape, your function, your grace, your silence will remain encoded in the rituals passed down in the scent of clove sand corridors, in the tilt of a teacup. Because empires are not built by thrones alone. They are built by the unseen hands that hold the bowl, that light the candle, that whisper the poem no one hears. And you were always there. You leave behind the echoes of perfumed silence and silk-draped corridors in Han China, only to find yourself stepping into a space at once grander and colder. This is no painted courtyard or chamber hidden behind folding screens. This is stone and sun-carved archways and high walls. This is Mamluk Egypt, and you are now one of the ghoums, but not the kind whose name inspires battlefield epics or cavalry songs. You are not galloping across desert plains or brandishing a scimitar. No, you are one of the other kind, the ones no one sings about, the ones who do not fight but wait. It's early morning in Cairo. The light is already harsh, pressing against the sandstone walls of the citadel, cutting patterns through the narrow corridors of the palace. The heat here does not wait politely. It intrudes, seeps, settles in folds of fabric and breath. You are up long before the call to prayer echoes from the minarets. Your robe is light, your movements lighter. You pass through the service hall without a sound, nodding at the other attendants' brothers in silence, if not in blood. You belong to the household of a high-ranking emir, one of the ruling class under the Bahri Mamluks. These men, once slave soldiers themselves, have risen to command palaces, governorships, entire cities. And with their newfound status comes the need for a household to match. You are not a slave in chains, but you are no citizen either. You are a ghoum, a personal attendant, a silent observer, a human ornament to underline the emir's wealth and refinement. Unlike your counterparts in the outer court, your world is limited to the innermost rooms, the private salons, the shaded patios, the marble bathing halls. You do not accompany your master into battle or public processions. You are reserved for the more intimate spaces, to prepare his robes, to oversee the serving of tea and fruit, to respond to subtle gestures with immediate action. You do not wait to be asked. You wait to be needed. There is a rhythm to life in this role, but it is not your rhythm. It is the emir's. If he stays up late, you do too. If he naps after prayer, you must be ready the moment he wakes. If he decides he needs a poem read to him in the bath, or fresh rose water brought into his chamber at midnight, your task is not to question, but to move. And so you move. In Mamluk Egypt, the role of ghoums was not formally codified in law, but it was widely understood in practice. These young men were chosen for their appearance, their intelligence, and above all, their pliability. They were often trained in courtly etiquette, poetry, music, and sometimes calligraphy, not for their own expression, but to serve the tastes of their master. You learned what kind of verse soothed him. You memorized the phrases that brought a smile to his lips, even if it never reached his eyes. The palace is quiet at this hour, but not asleep. There is always movement behind the carved mashrabia screens, servants exchanging news in hushed tones, cooks preparing breakfast, musicians rehearsing in case they are summoned. And you drift through it all like smoke. There's a historical record, a fragmentary list from the reign of Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad that describes the distribution of jeweled daggers to bodyguards, silken turbans, to household scribes, and 32 ornamental sashes gifted to the young ones of the house. That phrase, young ones of the house, is all you are. No name, no title, just presence. A surviving Mamluk mirror, now housed in a museum in Istanbul, carries a faint engraving on its bronze frame. Let the bearer reflect his master's will. It's unclear whether the inscription referred to the mirror or the person carrying it. And you do reflect him. At feasts you pour drinks into ornate goblets, not too fast, not too slow. You scent the water with crushed mint leaves and hibiscus petals, not because anyone asked, but because you learned his preferences without needing words. You stand beside the marble fountain in the courtyard, waiting with a towel that will never dry your hands, only his. You are not alone in this. There are others like you in palaces across the Mamluk world, Damascus, Aleppo, Alexandria. Some are dismissed after a few years. Others remain for decades, their names never recorded, their identities shaped entirely by proximity to someone else's power. Historians still argue whether ghoums like you were truly powerless, or whether they wielded soft influence in the shadows. Some suggest that proximity to the elite allowed for subtle manipulations, arranging meetings, intercepting messages, even altering moods. Others believe that such influence is a modern fantasy imposed on lives that were in truth defined by obedience. And yet there's a story, half legend, half footnote, about a ghoum who memorized the scent preferences of every visiting noble, and used this knowledge to prepare incense blends that influence political alliances. Whether it's true or not hardly matters. The fact that the story exists speaks volumes. Your daily duties are quiet but exacting. You polish the emir's shoes with lemon peel and camel bone. You fold his garments in precise thirds, never quarters. You lay out a poem before his seat each morning, not one of your choosing, but one you know he will recognize. You do all this while invisible. And when he passes you by without a word, without a glance, you feel no resentment, because invisibility has become your safety. Sometimes you find yourself staring into the fountain's rippling surface, not searching for your reflection, but for the faint glimmer of recognition. A moment where someone sees you. But then the water settles, and so do you. Evening in Cairo arrives quickly. The sky turns to copper, then indigo. The palace lanterns glow, and music drifts faintly from a chamber you are not permitted to enter. You sit near the threshold, not to listen, but to be near just in case a command comes. You remember the sand-filled corridors of the Han Palace, the clove-scented silence, the barefoot grace. And now here in Mamluk Egypt, the silence carries a different weight, one that smells of jasmine and dust, one that cloaks the stone walls like velvet. You do not dream of escape. You do not imagine rebellion. You imagine continuing, because even in stillness you are needed. Empires rise and fall on the shoulders of men like your master, but they are carried quietly by those like you, and so you wait not for freedom, but for the next moment you are required. Because you were never meant to be the center of the story. You were meant to hold its frame. And now, as the marble of Cairo fades from memory, you open your eyes to find paper walls instead of stone. The light here is cooler, thinner, filtered through layers of rice paper and winter air. You are no longer in Egypt. You are now in the capital of Joseon Korea, sometime between the 15th and 18th century. It is morning, but the day does not belong to you. It never has. The courtyard is silent, but not still. Gentle raking of gravel. The faint hush of straw sandals. Somewhere in the distance, the clang of a temple bell. But in your assigned chamber, the air is folded neatly, just like your bedding, and nothing moves until protocol says it may. You kneel to the floor. No one sees it, but you still bow. This is how your body begins each day, folded before duty, before names, before breath. You are now a court servant. In official records, you are labeled as part of the ney in a class of male attendants who live within the sealed interior of the royal court. Your status is low below scholars and officials, far beneath noblemen. And yet you live closer to royalty than any of them. You are not allowed to marry. You cannot inherit property. You may not leave the palace without written permission, and even then only briefly. Still, some considered the position to be enviable, not because of power, but because of proximity. To be within the walls of the Gyotaejeon, the queen's private quarters, or the Hamwiheon, where royal consorts lived, meant food safety and steady routines. But those routines were precise, absolute, and punishing in their perfection. Your life was a series of rituals, each act codified by law, etiquette, and expectation. Every gesture matters. You rise before the fifth watch, bathe in silence, and dress in a simple robe of dull green marked with no family crest. You wear no hat, no insignia. Your identity is your stillness. The queen's ladies may chatter among themselves, may whisper behind fans or shed tears when the news is bitter. But you say nothing. Your duty is to pour tea, prepare writing materials, light the morning incense. You must know how many times to bow, which direction to face, how to hold your hands when waiting for a command. You are not born to nobility, but you are expected to move like one, with grace, with humility, without flaw. You memorize every turning of the court's rhythm. When the king visits his consort, you arrange the incense bowls in a specific order, each symbolizing virtue, lineage, and harmony. When the crown prince falls ill, you fetch the healer's tools before he even arrives. When the queen's expression tightens, you anticipate her needs, not with guesses but with studied observation. There is no applause for your precision, but there is no correction either, and that in this life is reward. Records from the Joseon Annals, the Joseon Wangjo Siluk, note the presence of court servants in nearly every major royal ceremony. They are not named but described in their duties. 4 men prepared the matting for the queen's procession. 2 male attendants assisted in folding the royal letter. 3 dressed the altar with teacups and medicinal broths. That's you and others like you, tireless, invisible, essential. One tidbit from a 17th century court diary mentions a court servant who had memorized over 200 Chinese characters, not for personal literacy, but to prearrange the calligraphy sets, according to the queen's favorite proverbs. The detail is small, but it speaks volumes. Historians still discuss whether male court servants in Joseon Korea were truly voiceless, or whether they carried soft influence through their proximity. Some posit that they occasionally served as messengers between queens and ministers when direct conversation was prohibited. Others argue that any deviation from silence would have been considered treasonous. The truth may lie somewhere between that quietness is not the absence of agency, but its disguise. Your days blur but never change. Morning tea service, midday room inspection, evening incense rituals. You are present for births and deaths, for weddings and funerals, but you are never a participant, only a vessel. And still there is beauty. On some mornings, the queen's maid may forget a comb, and you're asked to fetch it. You glide past a screen painted with lotus flowers, past scrolls inked with poetry older than the kingdom itself. You move like breath through corridors designed to keep you unseen. And yet in that movement you belong. You may spend a full year folding letters you will never read, another year boiling herbal broths you will never taste. And through it all you learn to take pride not in authorship, but in arrangement, not in flavor, but in warmth. There's a moment once in the rain. You were lighting the evening lanterns when a sudden breeze knocked one over. Oil spilled just a little, but enough to cause alarm. You could have spoken. You could have shouted. But you didn't. You knelt, cupped the oil with your sleeve, and relit the flame without a sound. No one praised you, but the head attendant bowed to you the next morning, a silent nod shared between 2 ghosts. Because that's what you are here, a ghost, a figure carved into routine, an echo folded into daily ritual. And still you endure. You remember the sand-silent halls of Han China, the rose-scented basins of Mamluk Egypt, and now the rice-paper shadows of Joseon Korea. You have traveled through time not by name but by role, and in each place you were needed. The outer world may see you as voiceless, powerless, small, but the court could not breathe without your silence. The chill of the Korean palace fades. As you exhale, the air changes. The scent becomes heavier, sweetened by musk and rosewater tinged with sweat and oud. You blink, and now you're in the heart of the Ottoman Empire. The architecture has transformed around you. Domed stained glass, cool marble golden lattices, glowing in filtered light. You hear the faint shimmer of a zither, the faint percussion of a hand drum, a laughing fountain somewhere out of sight. But you are not one of the honored guests. You are behind the curtain. Here within the walls of the Imperial Palace in Constantinople, you are a kochek, not a warrior, not a servant in the formal court. You are trained to dance, not for coins in the streets, but for pashas and princes, and on rare occasions the Sultan himself. You are young, always young, and adorned as ornament, trained as spectacle. When guests recline on embroidered cushions to sip sherbet or wine, when they clap in rhythm under the moonlight, your job is to move. You do not choose the music. You do not choose the costume. And you certainly do not choose the gaze. But you are expected to be flawless. The term kochek derived from the Persian word for young, applied to boys who were selected for their physical beauty, and then trained in music movement and poise. Most were of Balkan or Caucasian origin, brought to the empire either through the devshirme system or from families seeking royal favor. You may have come from a village you barely remember given up for the promise of palace life, raised behind high walls and gilded doors. Your daily routine is strict rising before the first prayer call. You stretch and rehearse in silence. Your meals are plain, your days structured, your body monitored. Tutors correct every gesture. You must keep your back straight, your arms fluid, your wrists flexible like silk scarves in the wind. The goal is not to express joy or sorrow. It is to enchant. You are not trained alone. There are other scores of boys who practice beside you. But you are not competitors. You are interchangeable. If you fall ill, someone else will spin in your place. You learn not to crave individual praise. The goal is to dissolve to become movement. At official banquets or private gatherings, you wait behind a curtain until summoned. The music begins a ney flute drifting like incense, and that is your cue. You enter with downcast eyes, anklets chiming, silken sleeves catching candlelight. You spin, you sway, you stomp gently to the beat. But this is not revelry. This is performance. A ritualized delight structured, rehearsed, endlessly repeated. You dance for men whose names you may not know, but whose titles command deference. Grand viziers, governors, sometimes foreign dignitaries, their faces pink with sherbet and wine. You are watched closely, not cruelly, not always lustfully, but possessively, like one watches a caged bird's wings, and the wings must flutter perfectly. Tidbits from 18th century travelogues written by European diplomats in Constantinople mention performances by kocheks at elite gatherings, noting that they were trained with meticulous care and often costumed more lavishly than the female dancers. Some remarked on the hypnotic quality of their dances, calling them living calligraphy set to rhythm. One observer noted that the finest kocheks could dance for hours without once locking eyes with their audience, trained never to meet a gaze, only to reflect beauty. Behind the grandeur, though, was control. The empire maintained a strict system to regulate the movement and presence of these performers. You lived in designated quarters within the palace or affiliated homes. You had no surname, no lineage. You were known only as so-and-so's kochek. When the time came, you would be retired often, while still a teenager, and your future after that depended entirely on your patron's favor. Historians still debate whether kocheks were entirely without agency. Some argue that favored dancers gained political influence through patronage, even receiving stipends or minor titles. Others insist that their lives were tightly controlled with no room for self-determination. Either way, your experience is not one of upward mobility, it is one of endurance. You train with a small drum tucked under one arm and silk bells on your ankles. You memorize patterns not only in steps, but in glances, silences, rhythms. You learn when to appear and when to vanish. You are not simply a dancer. You are a presence that enhances the status of those who watch you. There's a moment in one of the training courtyards. You're exhausted, your ankles bruise, the heat oppressive. A senior trainer approaches not to scold, not to praise, but to adjust your posture, a gentle push between the shoulder blades. You do not flinch. You understand that perfection is a requirement, not a goal. And yet in rare private moments, late at night, long after the guests are gone, you allow yourself to feel the music, not to rehearse, not to perform, but just to move. In the silence of an empty hall, you spin alone. There is no applause, no judgment, only the echo of your own breath. These are the only dances that belong to you. One fragment of Ottoman poetry found in a collection from the court of Sultan Ahmed III describes the koçeks not by name, but by metaphor, the rose that blooms in night's parade, never to be plucked nor planted. That's you, decorative, transient, not meant to endure, only to please. But even roses leave fragrance long after they're gone. Your quarters are modest, a shared room with 3 other dancers, a straw mattress, a small mirror you rarely use. Meals are regulated, no rich foods that might upset your balance, no oils that might dull your skin. Everything is meant to preserve an image that is not yours, but is yours to carry. Sometimes you catch glimpses of the outer world, the world of merchants, bakers, scribes. Men who walk with purpose, not determined by another's gaze. You wonder what it feels like to choose where your feet go, but you do not envy them. You know the cost of movement without protection. You remember the inner courts of Joseon, the soft-footed service, the tea smoke curling through paper screens. And before that, the perfumed silence of Mamluk palaces and the scroll-stacked stillness of Han chambers. Always in the background, always essential. And now, here in the Ottoman night, you are not in the background, you are center stage. But only for a moment. Then, like candlelight, you are snuffed out. Evening falls. The palace is quiet again. The fountains murmur. The scent of orange blossom wafts in through carved windows. You return to your shared quarters. Your feet soar, your soul quieter than ever. Because you understand now. Across every empire, you were not just the silent observer. You were the soft hinge on which power turned. You were not remembered, but you held memory. You were not celebrated, but you preserved celebration. You are not gone. You are simply not written, but tonight you are remembered, and so you live again. The scent of roses and oud fades replaced by something older, dustier, mildewed stone, dried herbs, and the faint metallic tang of rusted iron. You are no longer in the Ottoman Empire. As the golden drapes fall away in memory, you find yourself surrounded by painted walls, deep red and faded with time, images of fruit, of reclining nobles of gods, gazing down through the crumbling ceilings. You are in a villa in Imperial Rome now, but once again you are not its owner. You are not even a citizen. You are a pure delicatus, a favored boy. This term, translating to something like delicate boy, was not an official rank. It was a social shadow applied loosely to a certain kind of role boys kept in elite Roman households, for their youth, their grace, and their obedience. You are not a household slave in the traditional sense, nor are you free. You serve not with hands rough from labor, but with quiet attentiveness. You move like background music in a dinner party present, but not demanding, refined but forgettable. In the early Roman Empire, particularly during the Julio-Claudian and Flavian periods, elite Roman men, especially those without male heirs or overly concerned with social display, sometimes kept young boys as personal companions. Some were gifts, others were purchased, Still others were born into the household through complex adoption-like arrangements. A few had ambiguous legal status. Others were owned outright. What they shared more than anything was invisibility. You awaken in a quiet room near the peristyle, the open courtyard garden at the center of your master's domus. Morning sun falls through the colonnade, warming the stone mosaic beneath your feet. Your first duty is to prepare a basin of warm water, scented with thyme and laurel, then lay out the day's tunics, one for indoors, one for public display. You are not permitted to wear your own. You dress plainly in a beige or off-white linen shift that marks you as part of the domestic class, neither slave nor family. Somewhere in between. And yet everything you touch must be perfect. When you arrange the writing tablets, they must align precisely along the grain of the wood table. When you fetch the scrolls, you must know which author suits which mood. Cicero for business, Horace for leisure, Virgil for impressing guests. You do not read them aloud. That task belongs to an auctor, a reciter. But you must know them well enough to select them. You pour watered wine into bronze goblets, not too chilled, not too warm. You remain quiet unless addressed, though being addressed is not always welcome either. Your voice is expected to be soft, and if your accent betrays your non-Roman origin, you are corrected. Some poor delicati were made to wear earrings or adorned with ribbons, their hair grown long and curled in the Greek style. Not as punishment, but as display, but as their function was visual harmony, like a statue that walks. Your movements once again are choreographed. When your patron enters a room, you stand. When he gestures, you anticipate. When he frowns, you bow. Your entire world is a reading of one man's moods. Every twitch of an eyebrow, every sigh over a letter, every pause between bites of honeyed figs. It is not that you are always in danger. It is that you never quite leave the stage. Tidbits from surviving Roman frescoes and mosaics give us glimpses into this arrangement. In several villa wall paintings from Pompeii and Herculaneum, we see young androgynous boys attending reclining men, holding platters, fanning with feathers, arranging lyres. Their features are delicate, their postures deferential. One fragment, now housed in the Naples Archaeological Museum, even shows a boy in the background offering a scroll, though his face is smudged beyond recognition. That may as well be you. One quirky detail, elite Roman households often named their pure delicati, after stars or minor deities. Not formal names, but affectionate or symbolic ones. Orion Cupid, Phoebus Ganymede. You don't know your birth name anymore. But here you are, lentulous little lentil, perhaps for your smallness, or simply because the lady of the house found the name amusing. The law, if it applies to you at all, does so indirectly. You are not recorded in the family census. You cannot own property. You may be granted manumission freedom when you grow older, but that is rare and often complicated. More often you are simply replaced when your youth fades. Historians continue to debate how widespread this role truly was. Some argue that poor delicatus was a rare indulgence of the ultra-wealthy, limited to specific periods or provinces. Others believe it was more common than records suggest, hidden in plain sight beneath the more official language of household attendant. What most agree on is that the role had no upward path. You were chosen young, discarded quietly, and rarely remembered. There is a moment you remember clearly: early spring, the first almond blossoms drifting through the courtyard. You were adjusting a garland on the household shrine when your patron passed by. He paused, not out of fondness, but because the garland pleased him. He said nothing, just nodded. But that moment stays with you because in a world where you were meant to vanish, your action briefly left an impression. And yet that impression doesn't last. When you grow taller, your features sharpen, and the household begins to look elsewhere. You are not expelled, not punished, but you are gradually moved to less visible tasks: fetching olive oil, counting amphorae in the storeroom, cleaning lamps. Your youth fades, and with it, the only version of yourself this household ever valued. You begin to understand something deeper, that your worth was never in your thoughts, your hopes, your inner world. It was in your presence how you adorned the space around others, like a flower vase, not a person. Even now, as you sweep the floor of the triclinium, the formal dining room you pass under painted figures on the ceiling, nymphs, cherubs, heroes, all immortalized, all idealized. But no one paints the servant beneath. No one carves a name for the boy arranging the figs. Still you are there. You remember the soft steps of a kochek beneath domed ceilings, the murmured rituals of a court servant in Joseon, the disciplined grace of the ghoums of Egypt. In every palace, every villa, every echo of empire, you were the unrecorded stillness. You pause in the courtyard. The sun is stronger now. The garden has grown while you weren't watching. There's a cicada humming on the stone wall, oblivious to everything. You sit just for a moment, just to feel the stone's warmth beneath you, to exist, not as a symbol, but as a body, a breath, a heartbeat. You wonder if anyone will remember the garland you once adjusted, the wine you once poured, the silence you once kept. Probably not, but you remember. And so do we. By now you've passed through marble colonnades and gilded pavilions, drifted behind silk curtains and lingered in candlelit corridors. From Greece to Rome, from Ottoman halls to Korean courts, your feet have never truly been your own. And yet with every quiet step, every bowed head, you've carried history without leaving footprints. Now the architecture shifts again, not upward like Roman arches, or domed like Byzantine palaces, but inward and steep. The air grows humid. The sunlight fades beneath a thick canopy of banyan trees. Your breath catches as ancient stone towers loom from the jungle mist. You have arrived at Angkor. This is the kingdom of Angkor in its height, 12th century Cambodia, under the rule of King Suryavarman II. The temple of Angkor Wat stretches before you, massive and awe-inspiring, with its central quincunx of towers reaching toward the heavens. Carvings line every corridor, every corner, a galaxy of gods and kings and stories frozen in stone. But if you look closely behind the celestial dancers and mighty warriors, you will notice something quieter. Smaller figures in humble poses, attendants, servants, boys who walk behind the grandeur. You are one of them. You wake before dawn to the sound of gongs echoing across the temple grounds. The day is dictated by ritual incense water offerings, oil lamps prayer. You serve not one individual, but the divine presence woven into every carved wall and shadowed alcove. Your tasks are sacred and silent. You sweep petals from stone steps before sunrise. You carry bowls of rice, lotus flowers, and pressed palm leaf manuscripts to the monks. You light lanterns that flicker in the breathless halls, and you are always watched. Unlike other courts where your value rested in your beauty or your wit here, it rests in your devotion. You must kneel properly. You must chant softly. You must move as though invisible, never turning your back on a monk, never touching the sacred relics with bare hands. You are trained to become part of the space, not to inhabit it. Your name is not recorded in any inscription. You are simply one of the temple's many unseen hearts. Mainstream historians agree that Angkor's temple complexes were supported by large numbers of attendants and ritual workers, many of them children likely from local villages, some gifted by noble families, others taken in and raised within the temple walls. Though most records focus on the kings and high priests, some steles mention those who serve in silence, referring to boys who swept the halls, prepared offerings, and kept the sacred fire burning. Your daily routine is as rigorous as it is quiet. You learn to polish brass with crushed tamarind, to bind incense sticks with red twine to recite prayers, not with voice but breath. You must know when to appear and when to vanish, No one calls for you by name. Your arrival is expected without command. The bas-reliefs carved into the sandstone walls stretch for hundreds of meters, depicting scenes from the Ramayana, the churning of the ocean of milk, the battles of kings and demons. And always behind the grandeur are small figures like yourself, their arms outstretched in offering, their eyes cast downward. They are rarely central, but they are always present. One fragment on the southern gallery shows a royal procession, elephants, parasols, dancing girls, and behind them, almost imperceptibly, a line of young attendants bearing trays of fruit and jars of perfumed oil. Scholars debate whether these figures were meant to represent actual individuals or generalized symbols of service. But either way, they tell a truth. Every empire was carried on quiet backs. Your feet are bare on cool stone. The hallways smell of sandalwood and rain-damp stone. You carry a clay bowl filled with jasmine buds, careful not to spill. The floor is uneven, worn by centuries of footsteps before yours. Somewhere a bell rings and you freeze, not out of fear, but reverence. In the inner sanctum, you stand behind a curtain, listening to the head monk recite prayers in Pali. You've memorized them without meaning to every syllable, etched into your body through repetition. When he pauses, you step forward and refill the oil lamp. Your movement is a whisper. Tidbit. In rare archaeological finds near Angkor, tom remnants of wooden sandals were uncovered beside temple walls, likely worn by ceremonial staff. One pair bore tiny notches carved into the base, possibly a form of symbolic tallying or prayer. Some believe these may have belonged to young temple servants like yourself, offering a rare, tangible clue to lives otherwise erased. You do not see your reflection often. There are no mirrors in the temple, and even water basins are often clouded with lotus petals. But when you do catch a glimpse, you barely recognize the boy you used to be. Your skin is tanned from sunlit corridors. Your limbs are lean from carrying sacred bundles. Your face is calm even when your heart stirs. There is no luxury here. You sleep on mats woven from palm reed, sharing space with others like you. Your meals are simple rice, pickled vegetables, sometimes a sliver of jackfruit. But you are not hungry. You have learned to chew slowly to let silence be its own kind of nourishment. At night you watch the stars through carved windows shaped like lotus blossoms. You wonder where the gods go when the incense fades, whether they remember the boys who tended their altars. You think of the villa in Rome, the scented fountains in Cairo, the lacquered gates of Seoul, the domes of Istanbul, all the other lives you've carried, all the other silences you've worn like robes. You have never been loud, but you have always mattered. One scholarly debate surrounds whether these young attendants in Angkor were entirely bound to temple life or allowed to leave upon reaching adulthood. Some inscriptions suggest a form of ritual retirement, where older boys would return to villages and become caretakers or low-ranking officials. Others insist they lived and died within the walls, their stories absorbed by stone. There is something comforting in the ambiguity. Perhaps you do leave someday. Perhaps your hands no longer carry lotus bowls, but shape them in pottery. Perhaps you teach others the rhythms of quiet service. Or perhaps you remain watching newer, younger feet trace the same hallways you once walked. You take one last look at the eastern gallery before you close the incense box for the night. The moonlight catches the edge of a carving, two attendants holding a parasol above a royal priest. You recognize the posture. It is yours. And though your name is lost, your gesture endures. You sleep not in sorrow, but in stillness. Because here, even the smallest silence has weight. The temple stones of Angkor gradually dissolve behind you, replaced by heavy wooden beams, curved tiled roofs, and the soft rustle of silk robes on lacquered floors. The air feels heavier here, thicker with incense protocol and the pressure of silence. You are no longer in the kingdom of the Khmer. You've crossed to the east into the forbidden city of Viet, under the reign of the Lei Dynasty. The year is somewhere in the early 1500s, and you are now a ghoum, a young male attendant, confined to the imperial court. Unlike the expansive temples of Angkor or the open villas of Rome, the Lei court is a place of tight enclosures. Here everything is precise. The courtyard stones are swept before dawn. The bronze gongs ring at exact intervals. The queen's tea must be steeped precisely 3 times before it touches porcelain. And you, though only perhaps 13 or 14, are responsible for every one of those invisible details. Your day begins before the sky has turned gray. You rise from a woven mat in a shared dormitory, the scent of sandalwood clinging to your robes. You are not a monk, nor a servant, nor a courtier. You are something in between a silent hand in the machinery of the palace. Ghoums were young boys selected to serve in the inner chambers of the imperial palace. Most were not from noble families. Some were the sons of artisans or soldiers, chosen for their quietness, or their small frame easy to fit within narrow corridors, less likely to draw attention. They lived inside the palace walls, forbidden from marrying bearing children, or even leaving the grounds without permission. Your duties vary by the hour. In the morning you bring tea to the Queen Mother. At midday you accompany the princess to the reading room, carrying scrolls and carefully inked calligraphy. In the evening you polish bronze mirrors and prepare the sleeping chambers. You are always present, but never the focus. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not walk unless summoned. Even your breathing feels measured. Your name, too, has faded. Perhaps you once had a countryside name, a nickname your mother whispered at dusk while tying your sash. But here you are referred to only by your rank, and tasked the boy who lights the lanterns, the one who waits beside the parasol, the shadow by the curtain. The forbidden city of Viet was modeled after the imperial layout of Ming China, strict ceremonial inward-facing. The inner palace, reserved for royal women and their attendants, was especially cloistered. Few men were allowed beyond its gates. The ghoum were exceptions. But even then their presence was ghost-like. Historical records from the Lei Dynasty mention these attendants in passing, listed in ceremony logs, or noted briefly in palace expenses. One such entry from the Viet Suki Tuan Thu, the official chronicle, refers to the 4 young ones who arranged the lanterns in the Empress Dowager's quarters during a royal ancestor worship rite. Their names are not recorded, only their function. You remember that ceremony. You knelt for hours beside the ancestor tablet, watching as candlelight flickered across the queen's face. You knew when to bow, when to rise, when to blend into the darkened silk drapery. But what you remember most is the scent of the lacquer, the way it seeped into your robes and clung to your skin long after the ceremony ended. A scent like ironwood and rain. Tidbit. Some recovered ceramic figures from Laera burial sites depict small bowed male figures standing beside larger female forms, likely symbols of these young attendants. One even holds a tiny fan carved with peony blossoms. Though the glaze is chipped and the features weathered, the figure's posture is unmistakable deferent present and forgotten. There are moments when you forget your own age, when the palace rhythms swallow you whole, when the passing of seasons is marked only by the color of robes deep indigo, for winter soft jade, for spring crimson, for festivals. You are taught to write beautifully, though few will read your letters. You learn to arrange flowers in the Confucian order, orchid chrysanthemum, bamboo plum blossom, each symbolizing something you are told to embody. Humility, endurance, flexibility, silence. At times the palace feels like a poem written without ink. Every step a syllable, every gesture a stanza, and you are both the paper and the pen blank and bound. Scholars still debate the true experience of these boys. Some argue that ghoum were treated with great care, educated alongside royal children, offered occasional rewards or special garments. Others suggest they lived lives of isolation and obedience, slowly erasing themselves to better serve others. What is clear is that they remained unmarried and unrecognized outside the palace walls. Whatever joy they had, it was quiet and conditional. You sometimes wonder what lies beyond the red gates, whether your mother still lights oil lamps at dusk, whether your old dog still sleeps beside the lotus pond. But you know better than to ask. Even your dreams have become silent. And yet one night after lighting the final lantern, you step out into the courtyard. The moon is high, casting shadows across the stone dragons curled around the balustrades. The cicadas have fallen quiet. The magnolia tree has dropped its last bloom. You sit just for a moment under the moonlight, and you allow yourself one breath that belongs to no one else. One moment of stillness that is yours alone. Because across time and empire, through every temple and chamber, from Greece to Cambodia to here, you have been the quiet machinery that kept everything turning. And so we arrive here at the final hush of your long, invisible journey. You have walked through marble and fire, silence and song. You have belonged to kings and queens, gods and shadows. You have never spoken loudly, never claimed your place. But without you the candles would never have been lit, the scrolls never read, the curtains never drawn. The world, for all its thrones and crowns, has always relied on the hands that stay behind. And now we remember you, not as a figure in the background, not as a nameless silhouette, but as a soul, still, steady, sacred. Let this be your monument, not carved in stone, but whispered in warmth. We see you. We thank you. You were never alone. And now, let your eyes grow heavy and let the last of the candlelight soften in your mind. You've journeyed far tonight through stone courtyards and shadowed temples, from the marble symposiums of ancient Greece to the rain-slicked corridors of Jai Viet's forbidden city. You've worn many names and none, stood behind queens, beneath kings, outside the spotlight, but always inside history, always essential, always present. The lives we visited weren't recorded in grand chronicles or carved onto heroic statues. They whispered through rituals, through silent footsteps in echoing halls, through cups filled and robes folded, through the stillness of boys whose names faded even as they held the weight of empires. And maybe that's why we told their story tonight, because some of the most important lives are the quiet ones, the ones who gave without demand, the ones who endured without glory, the ones history almost forgot. But not you, not now. You've seen what it meant to serve without voice, to move through centuries without leaving a mark, and yet carry so much meaning. So take a breath, slow and full. Let it remind you that stillness has value, that gentleness has strength, that even in silence there is legacy. You don't need to shine to matter. You don't need to be seen to be remembered. You are enough even in the quiet. Now rest, soft traveler. The palace gates are closed for the night. The lanterns are lit. And you have finally returned to yourself. Sweet dreams.